First and foremost, I think that everybody viewed him as a mechanic because he was wonderful as such. But Shelby really saw his talents as a racer, and he was a real purist when it came to that. He didn't compromise in the slightest, and that was both his saving grace and his Achilles heel as well. Because, you know, throughout his life, he'd shot himself in the foot many times because of his desire to never lose any battle. But through winning battles, Ken Miles often lost the war. And for the first time with Shelby, he actually had somebody who thought strategically and who was supportive of him and behind him. Why do men risk this? You know, what is it? And trying to understand, and that was one of the real goals of the film, is to how can you get an audience who may never have gone around a racetrack to try to understand the thrill that these men get, the feeling of being alive in such a raw manner, that they do it in spite of the fact that they're very likely to die doing it. It's certainly something that drives Ken Miles, is this idea of perfection, of a perfect lap. It changes obviously as technology improves cars, but within a certain car, there is such a thing as a perfect lap, you know. If you can take it right to the edge without sliding it, then you're doing the absolute top speed that you possibly can. He's somebody who's got no money, the IRS is taking everything from him, and it's not about that for him. You know, it's not about just making money, it's about, you know, well-being and happiness. For Ken Miles. He sees other drivers come by and get the sponsorships, the younger, better looking guys that he's looking at in the rearview mirror. They're always the ones getting hired by the big guns in the racing world, and he never is. But he still keeps going, he never gives up. Our approach to acting is sort of similar to the differences between our characters as well, between Shelby, who is more strategic and understanding of the bigger picture, versus Miles, who's just sort of doing his thing, and you know, often burning bridges and creating scorched earth, but just sort of feeling like, hey, that's the only way he knows how to do it. But I really enjoyed working with Matt, and I think it was a great relationship that then actually helped play into our characters. Oh, it's such a great luxury. You know, some people talk about, oh, it's a bit more intimidating when you've got a real character. I find it the opposite. I think it's really liberating because, you know, there are eccentricities and mannerisms that real people have that if you were just inventing them for yourself, you might seem like you're just being an egotistical actor who's trying to, you know, steal screen time or something, which really is the opposite of being a team player and wanting a good film. But when there are real people, you go, my God, they really did that. They really had that attitude. I never would have had the guts to just suggest that to a director, but there it is, plain and bold, it's the truth. And so I find there's a great liberation in doing that, in playing, you know, a real person. The thing with Jim is that the characters are really his joy, completely. I mean, Jim would probably be the first to admit that racing's really not his thing, particularly. And so that's an interesting dilemma. When you start, you think, wait, what? You don't really know much about racing. But what it means is he learns enough about it to understand the exhilaration, but is not so entrenched in the details that he loses the big picture and the heart of the matter. And it's resulted in just a wonderful film, something that I just take such pleasure in watching. It's a real joy. They didn't know if they could stop at that time, you know? I mean, nowadays brakes are by far the most powerful, you know, part of any car. But in those days, they were flying down that Mulsanne straight at 230 miles an hour. Now, I don't know what top speed you've ever gone at. I know on my motorcycle, when I looked, because I usually just would tape it over because I didn't want to know. But when I did look, it's like 153. And I felt like I was going to go to the moon. 230 miles an hour in the 60s when they weren't really sure if they were going to be able to stop at the end of that. You know, what type of man is willing to do that? That's a fascinating man, and that's worth making a film about. That's what Jim has done so beautifully. It does transcend being a racing movie. The races are phenomenal. They are so bloody exciting, but it is more than a racing movie. This is a bunch of dreamers. These are a bunch of characters who the odds are against them, that most people would laugh them out of the room in saying they do not belong in this echelon, you know, of racing, but they persist and they never give up. And that's the beauty of it, because ultimately it is about these characters, it is about these misfits who triumph, and it is about maintaining your belief and your passion and following your dreams, no matter how many missteps you take along the way, that ultimately that's the only route to happiness. And that's what makes it such a poignant film and brings tears to my eyes when I watch it. We were so lucky to have many of the sons who are still racing drivers of the actual characters within the film. So, for instance, at the lineup for Le Mans, as Ken Miles is standing there and he's looking side to side, you know, these gentlemen, they were the sons of the actual guys who were next to Ken Miles before that moment, you know, and you can't help but feel, you know, how momentous that moment is, and the beauty of the repetition and these sons getting to play their own fathers in that moment, you know. I mean, that really touched me.
You know, I'm a massive fan of sports films. I just think they show kind of a side of ourselves and our, you know, the human spirit and what we can really do when we put our mind to something. And it was nice to see a man who goes out and puts his life on the line, but how that affects his family, and what families of people who go and do these extraordinary things, what they have to go through. It's about this beautiful story about human spirit and what it takes to have this scrappy team to, you know, get together, and what it takes to do something really incredible, and yet it's really funny, and yet there's also really beautiful, heartbreaking moments as well. And it's one of those scripts that when you read it, you're like, okay, I can't wait to see this film, and I want to be in it. Such a gift to be in a scene with an actor of that quality. Your game is raised every time you step into a scene together, because he's just so present and he has such an understanding of who his character is, and it's been really, yeah, it's been quite an incredible experience to work with him. He has such a presence. Like, the thing with Matt is when you meet him at first, you're just, oh my God, you know, he's so present, and he's incredible as Carroll Shelby. When we did the first table read, you know, he's got such a way, he's so funny. So yeah, it's been really cool. He's so sweet. I love Noah. He's like such a great kid. He's an amazing actor. Yeah, it's been really fun. You know, the two of us been hanging out. They get to go do all the cool car stuff, and we hung out in Highland Park. You know, it's great. What I love about Jim is that even though he has such clear vision of what he wants, he's also quite free within that. And I think that that's just the sign of someone who's really confident and really good at what they do, is that they have that pliability as well. This was a real turning point in the history of racing. You know, this is the first time an American team won, and it stopped the dominance of Ferrari. And you know, even though Ford was this, you know, superpower of a car manufacturer, they weren't a racing team, and they could never really they weren't really in that race to, you know. Ferrari had dominated for so long, and this really flipped the script on that.
I desperately wanted to be a part of this film. I think for a whole sort of plethora of reasons. I think the personnel, the people that are making it, the script was beautiful. Mr. Mangold's a director that I have the utmost respect for, somebody who I've tried to work with in the past, and I will continue to want to work with him. You know, when you find a script that's you know, captivating. It has you know, the through line of the script and where it goes. It's sort of a beautiful story. And as I was saying before, you know, the themes of friendship and ingenuity and ideas and being bold and being caught between what your job and what people around you expect versus what you know in your heart. I mean, this is sort of like, you know, I mean, it's sort of epic kind of, you know, timeless themes, and it's all over this. But the script is really funny. It's extremely human, and you know, it's a beautiful piece of work. I've really gotten to know Matt a bit on this job, and I just think he's equal parts just a brilliant artist and such a kind and genuine and awesome human being, and I'm so grateful for the people. It's one of the best things about this job is the people you meet on the you know, down the road, and you know, Matt Damon, I can't say enough good about him. This idea to go and to buy Ferrari, you know, was an extremely fascinating idea, and I love the way it sort of is set up with Iacocca, because the idea, you know, he pitches it to Ford, and he sort of falls flat on his face, but he finally wins them over, and he finally gets the blessing, and he goes over and he tries to buy Ferrari, and it gets thrown right back in his face. And you know, I think, you know, 99 guys out of 100 at that point would tuck tail and run. But what Iacocca does is he goes back and he figures out a way to stoke Ford and to align himself with Ford and say, hey, let's go beat these guys. When you look at everything that's going on in the world, you know, honoring what you really believe in your heart is right, and honoring the people that you've given your word to, you know, versus just trying to do what's right for the people that you work for. And even if you know that serving your higher-ups is not necessarily doing what they say, but doing what you believe in your heart is right. And it puts people in these sort of crazy, stressful situations. And, you know, I think ultimately, you know, the power of friendship and the power of integrity is really what's celebrated in the film. These are highly, highly ambitious human beings, and the way in which their relationships with their ambition are very, very different. And whether it's corporate, whether it's artistic, whether it's grouping people together, who knows? But I think somehow, in not a smooth way at all, these unbelievably talented, ambitious people all collided with each other, aligned with each other, fought with each other, and the outcome was this ridiculously powerful, awesome automobile, and this, you know, this unbelievable feat of man and machine. The times, they are changing, man. It's the 60s in America, and here comes, you know, Lee Iacocca, son of an immigrant, grew up blue collar, Allentown, talks a little bit different, a little bit rough around the edges, doesn't have blonde hair, blue eyes. He sticks out, and he is a real threat to BB. And I think these two guys, they just, you know, they do not like each other.
This movie is really a pretty classic underdog story. At the time, in the Le Mans 24-hour race, it was dominated by Ferrari, and it seemed every year he would go and every year he would win, and he was just the master builder and designer of these beautiful cars that were you know, famous around the world for being kind of the epitome of perfection. They were both old. They were both in their 40s. Like, Miles was at the end of his run, really, and this was his last chance. And so the movie really follows that dynamic, that relationship, and all those dynamics within it, as these two guys who are very different but have a deep and abiding respect for each other attempt to do the impossible. What I loved about it when I first read it was that it's incredibly relatable, because this relationship is the centerpiece of the movie. But you really feel what this means to both of them individually. You go back to the home with Ken Miles, and you see his relationship with his wife and his son. You see what's at stake and the crossroads he's at, the financial trouble he's in, and you get that with Shelby as well. You know, this is an inflection point in both of their lives. They need each other in order to have the outcome that they both need to have happen. But they fight like brothers, you know, which is, you know, they drive each other pretty, you know, crazy, which is a lot of fun. It's like a classic buddy movie. Working with Jim was I mean, that was really, I've said for years I take movies based on who's directing them. That's really the first thing that I look at, and that's my first that's the first kind of question I ask when something comes my way. And then there's the screenplay and the role, and you know, obviously who else is in it. But when I heard it was Jim, and then potentially Christian, like we kind of came into it at around the same time. But it was you know, that was, I've been following Christian for a really long time, you know, just as a fan of his work, and Jim as well. Jim I've known for 20 years, and we'd never found something to do together, and so it was a very easy choice for me to sign on to this one. Certainly, anytime you make a movie about a particular subset of human beings, right, and in this case it's car lovers, you know, presumably you'll have those people, like we have them at Hello, you know, because this is a movie where you're going to be able to recreate that time and that life and these cars that people really love. For me, as somebody who, I'm not you know, I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, like taking the subway, so I didn't grow up in a car culture. The fact that I loved the movie, you know, when I read it, you know, that's what got me excited about it, because hopefully we can get the people who are into car culture, and then the people who just want to see a great movie, you know, kind of a great underdog story. The story is so relatable, just on you know, from a human standpoint. I think about this friendship, and about these guys who really cared about the same thing, and as a result cared about each other, and despite being very, very different. I think the most fun I had, I got to go to work with Christian every day and watch him and see what he was going to do. You know, it just was, you know, I think that guy is just a miracle of an actor. He's incredible. And you know, to feel like this script is really good, and our director is great, and I'm working with Christian, like, it was just an exciting movie to get up and go make every day.
I think every actor in the world, not only Italian actors, they would like to play this kind of character, because it's not only a character, it's a icon, it's a myth, you know. So it has something more than a simple character, you see? Because when you play it, you have all the imaginary who follows you, imaginary of the audience. He was world known. Everybody knows what a Ferrari car is. I immediately liked the script because it's there is everything in it. There is friendship, there is love, there is passion for the races, and there is and it's very well written. The dialogues are fantastic, and changing of situation, and you really get in love of the main characters of the movie. One thing that it's surely about, it's people who is fulfilling their destiny and their passion. They, most of the characters, some of the characters, are doing what they're born to do. And they're trying with all the strength they have to achieve what to realize their passions, you know? You know, I'm a Ferrari guy. But the 4 GT was the most powerful car at that time. They had only this problem that we see in the movie, that the motor was so powerful that the structure sometimes of the car wasn't able to sustain it, all this power. But it's a beautiful car, and the merit, the guy who built it were Shelby and Miles. James Mangold has an eye all for the action, but also for the characters and for the private life. It's not an action movie, you know. There is a lot of action, but it's not an action movie. It's an interior movie, which is really interesting for actors, you know. It talks about inner sentiments, you know. Matt has a sort of, let's say, it has some a touch of comedy in his character also, no? You know, it's a profound character, but he has also, because he's a man who drinks, who has women, but his passion are the cars. And he's an ex-pilot, like Ferrari was an ex-pilot, you see? That's another thing that they have in common. And car pilot, you know? And when you see them on the set, they look perfect. You know, they look perfect in their roles, you know? I hope they can go away from this movie and understand that money is not the important part of one's life. But the sometimes you need money to do things, of course. But the most important part of our life, the most important thing of our life is passion.
I really wanted to play this role because obviously I'm into racing and I love racing cars, and obviously this film is about an important moment in history of motorsport, and to play the son of one of the drivers who took part in this event is, you know, I was really excited to do it. I loved the detail in the script, and I loved how you could picture everything that was happening, the gear changes, the setting, and they just described it all so fantastically. I'd say it's about Le Mans, and it's about the kind of reign of Ferrari and how Ford built a car that changed Le Mans history forever, and how they built it and how they beat Ferrari in the race. So I'd say it's about that, and I'd say it's about, you know, the teamwork and all the characters, how they have to sacrifice everything to win. I think the theme is that, you know, it gives the message of how much risk and sacrifice there is for a racer and people who are in the racing business. For example, in Le Mans in 1966, 1 in 4 people were dying every year in the race. So it's, you know, a high chance that you could die, and if obviously Ken Miles has a family and everything, and it's about how he, you know, all the things he has to do to get to the top. That's what I think the message it gives. Christian Bale is one of the nicest people I've ever met. He is honestly, you know, he'll say hi to you, he'll joke around with you. He's always playing pranks and, you know, being really funny. But also he's really focused and really always in the zone, always ready to go as soon as it says action. And he has really done his research on Ken Miles. I mean, you ask him anything and he will know about it. And I think that really is great when it comes to knowing what Ken would do in this situation or something. And I feel like he's really made the character come alive, and you can really see how he's put detail into it. Caitriona is also one of the nicest people I've ever met, and for them to be my parents is just great because I get to hang around with them all day. I mean, she's always, you know, looking out for me and always checking if I'm okay. And I feel like she's really bringing the heart and warmth and kindness to Molly Miles, like, you know, the mother sense of her. And I feel, you know, it's really made her sweet and lovely. He hasn't failed this time to keep his reputation up. You know, he's always the coolest guy in the room, and he's always got, you know, an idea about the scene, and he's always ready on set. Yeah, he's really bringing a kind of cool sense to Shelby in a way that he's always kind of been able to get out of situations, and he's always playing that kind of, you know, is he really on your side or not, in that way that he's kind of a businessman in a sense. And I feel like, you know, he's going to be a very cool character to watch on screen. He's really cool. He's got that energy that stays the same but is a really high energy, and he's always, you know, coming up to you, talking to you, asking you what you feel, you know, talking about the scene. He's up for change, you know, at any time. He's always like, you know, changing the scene just because of like a little bit, and he's really encouraging and helpful when it comes to if you're kind of confused with something that happens. He will really explain himself, and he's always knows what, before he gets on set, he always knows what he wants, and he, you know, he can get it in a sense that everyone is happy. Yeah, and I feel like he's doing this job really well.
They're just terrific guys. We've had a really nice time with each other. They're fun and they're easy. It's a nice bunch of boys. I've really enjoyed the time with the boys. He's inspirational, I have to say. All the fellows have talked about it. You feel like you'd go into battle for Jim. He really inspires that. Production design is fabulous. The first location I worked in was the Ford office, and I walked onto the office, and the first thing I said was, "Oh well, I don't have to do anything. This has done it all for me." And you really kind of feel that way. I've been very lucky in that the sets I've worked on, I've gotten to work on some of the most impressive sets in the movie. The Le Mans set, the Rouge, the Ford factory, Ford offices, and the hangar, Shelby's hangar out at what's supposed to be LAX. All of them just spectacular locations, just really, well, like I said, they make an actor's job much easier. The real story of these people is shot through with death and destruction. I mean, these guys were absolutely taking their lives in their hands every time they got behind the wheel of a car. And yet, all of them said, it's worth it to me. I can't imagine not doing this. That need to push the boundary, to push the envelope. These men love these cars enough they're willing to die for them and in them. And I think that's a remarkable thing to see. The perfect lap is anything that you want to do exceptionally well. That only comes through a lot of practice, a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, technical knowledge, expertise, risk. I think all of those things go into doing anything, quote unquote, perfectly. And so I think most everybody can identify with that. I want to be able to do this as well as anybody can do it. I think this thing is gonna really get people juiced in the best sense. I think it's gonna be really thrilling to watch these men in these cars.
Oh, I was intrigued to play this character, Leo Beebe, for multiple reasons. Primarily because I really am fascinated by our director's work. I think the guy's extraordinary. And then the story, obviously you have, Christian Bale and Matt Damon, and you have, world-class actors telling just a terrific, wildly entertaining, strange slice of American history. And then you have this character, Leo Beebe, who I play, who was a fascinating central figure within the drama and the villainry, in a way, of what happens within the story of the decision to basically take these 3 Ford cars across the finish line at the exact same time, and how all the dynamics that got them to that final moment, basically. And I just thought the character was, a terrific conflict, in a sense. He was a terrific, anti-hero, in a way, through all of the different scenes. It takes a very rare director who has the ability to be at this point in his career to pull off a movie like this. And I feel like, obviously, Jim was sort of given this story at this point in his career where I feel, is on fire right now as a creative filmmaker. And to tackle something I keep saying it's like the Lawrence of Arabia of car driving. I think the thing I really took away from it is more the idea about men at a certain point in their lives, as friends, a certain point in their lives, and in their careers, in their corporate careers, and in reinventing themselves, or in terms of the period of time where they decide they don't want to play the game anymore, and all these different things that are all sort of colliding together in the storytelling and in the actual experience, the true story that happened here, and these strange, powerful men in these huge corporate elements with Ford and Ferrari and these sort of big egos that were involved. Henry Ford, Enzo Ferrari, Ken Miles, Shelby, all these different people, and this character Leo Beebe, who has that same level of, in Lee Iacocca, John Bernthal's amazing character, all these men sort of colliding in their power and egos at the point in their life where they are either exactly who they are for the rest of their life, or they're making big changes. I found it fascinating. I love this job in so many ways. I love this particular job because when you get to work with people who you feel are your matinee idols, in a way, even if you get to work with people who technically are your equals, in a way, you've grown up together. I didn't know Matt at all. I just know his work, and I'm a huge fan of his work. I think people are going to really love watching Christian in this movie because he's got this sort of loose, very strange, sort of just original take on the character that is really fun to watch. He's got a kind of comedic looseness to him that we oftentimes don't get to see Christian play, which takes me back to what I did with him with American Psycho, where he had that too, even though the character is so, obviously savagely intense. But Christian is a world-class, if not one of the great actors of all time, and you see it when you play with him, and he also happens to be a terrific guy, so it's kind of rare. What I see on a daily basis is this ultra obsession to detail that's really quite remarkable, even to the point where we had one of I thought, the most fascinating days I've ever had in my career, where it was the Ford plant, or the Ford factory, and they had built this entire factory of Ford for one single day of shooting this extraordinary scene, and Jim was behind the camera, and he was very agitated about one of the what one of the extras was doing deep in the background. And the director of photography asked him, "Why are you even looking at that?" And Jim said, "I don't look at the face. I am a doctor. I look at the pancreas." It's built from scratch because almost all of it, you can't just, these places don't exist anymore. That's why I keep saying it's the Lawrence of Arabia of car racing films. There's a massive artistry behind the design of these cars and the operation of them too. And then what I find fascinating is the dynamics that go into being a race car driver and the madness of it, and the idea that particularly back then, they were borderline test pilots. This movie is truly about the dynamics of these men and these families and this group of people who all collided together to try and do this. It's obviously a movie that the central idea is about racing, but I think the thing that actually interests me most, and I think that people will take away more from the movie, is the idea of the relationships between these men and between, the families that were involved, in Noah's wonderful character, and it's just, I find that to be what's struck me about this movie. The challenge of the story and the challenge of Ferrari being so powerful and consistent in how every race they were winning, and that Ford wasn't even really in the game at that point, and they were starting to be out of the zeitgeist of American thinking in some ways, and the horror that caused in Henry Ford II, and that caused in people like Leo Beebe, and the fact that they truly believed that this company had a much more important place in American history and in America. And so that's really what this fight was about in some ways. Yes, it was about racing, but more it was about, its place in history. And I think that's where the movie really also hits a very interesting tone of, a company struggling for survival, and an epic company struggling for survival, and a company that felt like it had won the war, a company that felt like, it had truly been involved in the building of America at its most idealistic, at its most powerful time after the war, and the technology that's going into building cars at that point too, and the changes. It's just a very deep part of American history, actually. I'm not much of a car guy, but I walked onto this set today and I was like, I want that car. For the first time in my life, I was like, that car in particular, I want to figure out, is that something, it struck me. The beauty of these cars is really interesting, and also makes me be like, why are we not making cars that look like that anymore? My hope is this is a rare, cinematic, very exciting evening of just amazing entertainment, truly. I mean, that's really what it is. And it also happens to be historical, and I think it's going to have some really fantastic acting and just some epic, sort of rare, old school filmmaking and the scope of it.
For me, what was always drawing me to the story of Shelby and Miles and the Shelby American team and Ford and Ferrari and the rivalry were the unique group of characters that gathered together, all of whom were so opposite. I mean, you had, even among the corporate world of Ford, you had such different personalities as Henry Ford II and Iacocca and Leo Beebe. In the world of racing and hot rodding, Carroll Shelby is kind of a salesman and a hustler, and a character who was kind of compensating for the fact he could no longer race himself. And Ken Miles was a completely different character, kind of a hothead, almost unable to somehow be flexible enough or polite enough to kind of survive in more trying or stressful social situations. And so, and you add to that kind of all the other characters that came along with Shelby American, who were all kind of out of the Los Angeles and Southern California kind of hot rod tradition. You'd had kind of expert engineers, guys who had come out of the war and kind of gotten into cars. You had kind of surfy, hot rodder kind of characters. You had beatniks and just racers, drag racers, all of whom were part of this world of cars in the mid-60s in the Southern California area.
What was also so interesting to me was the way each of the characters' own challenges personally played into the way the movie resolved itself. In Ken Miles' case, a guy who's unbendable and won't compromise and always seeking perfection, at the climax of the film has to actually bend and compromise. And in Shelby's case, a guy who's talked himself into everything and is a natural salesman and a kind of, almost you'd say, a kind of professional persuader. He has to kind of speak honestly to Ken Miles and deal with the ramifications of the race afterward in a more honest way, that he can't kind of talk or dance his way through. I think it's a movie about friendship. I think it's a movie about brotherhood. I think it's a movie about the things we accomplish in connection and in collaboration with others, and that our own selves, we all can become enlarged and extended and our abilities heightened by those around us. And that the unique cast of characters in this film all could never have accomplished what they had accomplished without each of the other players. And their egos may want to think each of them did it on their own, but what is so beautiful is that there is no one who didn't play a part, whether it's Ford and its engineering team, whether it's Shelby and his kind of hired on team, whether it's drivers like Ken Miles who were instrumental in actually figuring out the car and making it work on the road. But so the short answer is, I think it's a film about friendship, about brotherhood, about and about the people we lose that change us. Shelby saw Ken as a driver that might even be better than him. That, you know, one thing, we all have things we're really good at, and what comes with our skills is also an eye for other people who have the same skills. And I think Shelby recognized in Ken, when he saw him on the track and he saw him examining a car or checking it out, that this was someone who rivaled or exceeded his own instincts behind the wheel. There is such a thing as reaching perfection, and that the road is finite, the car is finite. These aren't ephemeral things. So there must be then the perfect way to drive them. Meaning, if these things are real and hard and math and physics relate to them, then I'm the only fallible element. I'm the only unpredictable element in relation to all these knowns: the road, the weather, the air, the car, its capabilities, its brakes. And so Ken was always after trying to be, to almost take himself out, to be so perfect that he matched the kind of dependability and that he matched the perfection of the vehicle itself. Ultimately, what was so intense about the GT40 was the amount of muscle in it. I mean, the challenge of the car was never, can it go fast enough? In a way, they put as much engine, I mean, we depict a lot of it, they put as much engine as they could possibly pack into that size car. More engine than, in a sense, anyone else had. What I mean by engine is power and speed. And the challenge of the vehicle was how to stop it, how to slow it down. In a straight drag race, the GT40 would have beat the Ferrari hands down any time, but their challenges were different. The Ferrari was a beautifully handling car, which could accelerate and decelerate with perfection, although it just didn't have the juice, it didn't have the power of the GT40. The GT40 was a kind of, in the American tradition, a kind of muscle car, but didn't have the finesse. And that was why it took them a few years. A lot of the research we did was to try and recreate not only the charting, the way the cars changed over the years, both in body and engine, and driving styles changed, and obviously body paint and all that, but also how they drove them and how they related to them, all of that. What is a real challenge and hard to convey is that every time someone makes a full lap in our movie, they are passing through 5 or 6 different locations. There are shots from Agua Dulce, California, one location in Atlanta, another location in Atlanta, a third location far from Atlanta, then back to the third location from here, and then another location in the Georgia, in rural Georgia, and then back to Agua Dulce, California. Both Matt and Christian are incredible drivers, so I had one huge advantage. Both of them have driven in films before, been trained to drive. Christian's a motocross driver for years, has raced motorcycles, has kind of quit doing it out of fear of getting injured, but it was his obsession for years. And so both of them are natural drivers and look great behind the wheel. But most of the other drivers in the film, everyone playing drivers, are drivers. They are people who drive race cars, and actors as a hobby. In many of them, a hobby that only consists of their one appearance in a movie, our movie. They're drivers, and because most of what I felt like they were going to have to do wouldn't be expert line readings, but in fact look like the real thing behind a wheel. And it also was obviously a kind of cost savings that we could have people doing both duty, that I wouldn't have to double. Every time someone got out of a car, I didn't have to replace them with an actor. A lot of our drivers were playing the drivers who were literally behind the wheel. What was most important to us was, in an age when everything feels possible because of computer graphics and visual effects, we wanted to make a movie where you felt the high of being on the road, and not a kind of tentpole movie digital simulation of it, but the reality of it. And that visual effects, for me, my kind of evangelism on the movie was that I always wanted them to be supplemental, about completing grandstands or sets we couldn't afford to build, but that the action on the road would be real and would feel real. Our driving team, that was very much their kind of mission statement, was to try and achieve everything they could as safely as possible as it happened. I thought there was a lot of Ken in Christian. And I think one of the revelations of the film is where you get to see so much of himself as a working class kid from England, as a guy who loves motorsports, as a kind of passionate perfectionist, as a family man. Another aspect of Christian that really connects with the movie is he's a great father and a husband and loves his family, and it's where he'd rather be than almost anywhere else. And all those aspects of his character, his personal character, fuse with Ken, and I think give him a chance to give audiences a taste of a really honest piece of himself. The role of Carroll Shelby, who I think Matt is very much an aggressive sportsman, he pushes himself very hard. I could connect with, even though it's more imagination, is what I would feel if I had to stop. What would that feel like if I had to unplug the creative high I get from acting? And I think that in many ways, I think Matt was a natural at kind of I'm trying to find the right word for it, the kind of almost musicality of Carroll Shelby, that he speaks in a kind of, that he kind of mesmerizes. I think that Matt and I worked a long time on the scenes where, in the script, where he kind of holds forth or tells a story, and you almost fall into the spell of his words. And I think it was really important that Shelby have that ability, because in many ways, his character, it's both his strength and his liability, is that he can talk his way out of almost anything. And when someone can talk their way out of almost anything, it means they've lived an almost unaccountable life. So in some ways, the movie is very much about Shelby also having to kind of own pain or own loss or feel it, and maybe not have a way to dance out of it. Ray McKinnon as Shelby's sideman and lead engineer is brings a kind of drawl and a kind of, he's almost the brakes on, his character is almost the brakes on Shelby's. if Shelby is always wheeling and dealing, this is his Jiminy Cricket, kind of always trying to bring things back to reality. I think what Caitriona so beautifully captures is both someone who's living with the parameters of what it is to be a wife in the early 1960s, but is also pushing against them and is making demands on her husband and even getting involved in their future in a way that is pushing at the edges of like, I don't want to find out about this shit later. You need to talk to me. You need to talk to me about our finances. You need to talk to me about your decisions. And is also a fan, rooting, and also praying that he comes back. First time I saw Tracy Letts was in Homeland, and playing the CIA director and kind of a villain of that series. And I felt like he was one of the best things in the show. And since then I've always felt jealous and startled every time, jealous of the directors who get to work with him and startled, how did he pick that, or why is he doing that? And of course it has a lot to do, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer himself, and he's got other stuff to do except act. But I was thrilled when he took to the role of Henry Ford II. If anything was important to keep you locked into this movie, if anything was vital for me, it was that you felt that these characters were always one blink of an eye away from death, that these things, these were hulking beasts, these cars. There were no roll bars. The shells were made of aluminum or fiberglass or some combination. I think it very often felt for them like you were riding at 200 miles an hour in a cardboard box, there was no real protection. And that I wanted you to feel in the images and the sound and the way the light is playing in the cab of the car, that you are flying in this kind of crazy, fragile cockpit. And I think both Fate and I wanted very much to get you in the race, you know. I had one producer on the film say at one point to me, like, well, there's only so many ways you can shoot cars, you know. Meaning, are you going to pan like this? Or are you going to travel along like this? And I was like, we're not going to do any of those. Meaning, my thing was like, let's get in the cars. I don't want to cover it like they do on TV. Meaning, I think the way it's going to feel like a movie is if the coverage of the race feels like nothing you ever saw watching, you know, Wide World of Sports on the weekend, that you're much more with the driver, breathing with the driver, feeling the road, feeling every decision they're making with the gear shift, with the steering wheel, feeling the weather pressing against you and all the other oppositional forces against their vehicle and their success. I hope the film, beyond the splendor of the period and the period racing and the beauty of the cars, I hope what you really get from it is a yearning to have friends like that, or to cherish the ones you have that are like that. And because for me, the movie is all about these connections between these guys and all of them in an effort to do the best they can to achieve something that has been unachieved.
It's about men and women, primarily men in this case, being innovative, being creative, fighting the system, and a lot of those things resonate with me, and so, and plus it didn't hurt that I was offered the role, which is always a big selling point for me. Oh, you want me? There was a task, and what seemingly impossible task to overcome. And by the will of these people, of these very driven and creative people, they were able to accomplish this seemingly impossible task. In a way, it's about love. It's a love story, and sometimes the love story is about Ken Miles and his wife. Sometimes it's about him and his son. Sometimes it's about both Ken Miles and Shelby and their love of cars, and including Phil Remington. So it's about loving what you do, and in a lot of ways, what you're about. He was an engineer, he was a fabricator, he would envision a part that had never been before. He would figure out how to make it, and he would fabricate it himself. He did all of these things. So he's an unsung hero in the story about how Ford was able to overcome its obstacles and maybe beat Ferrari. We can't tell you yet for sure. Jim has a way of seeing a take and having a visceral reaction to it and coming to you and discussing about what that reaction is and how about let's try something different, which is usually always the case with my choices. And I found that very helpful. It's a very symbiotic relationship with Master Director. And a lot of these guys were doing not only what they wanted to do, but what they had to do. And I think they appreciated that, that bit of luck in their lives that they found that. I think car racing, doing something that's never been done before, creating something that's never been created before, is a great petri dish for human behavior. The stakes are really high. People want things really badly. And you get to see under these extreme conditions how different people behave. And for me, who's always, I'm always more interested in what's happening with the characters in the story than actually the story itself, most often. That all of these characters in their own way get tested. And some come through shining, others come through flawed. And, that's something that's universal. Watching Shelby and these risk takers push Ford to back what they did to become Ford, which is take risks, and that's a big theme in the story. The thing I noticed about him is he's always very present as an actor, as his character. He's very honest, and if I got lost somehow in my role, and I didn't know where I was, I just focused in on Christian and it was going to be all right. He'd bring you back into the world that we were in. He's got a very sharp mind, and he's a guy who loves a good discourse. And I think for me, I've just really enjoyed that relationship as we've found our kind of a way of working together. And now I know why his movies are so good, because he cares about everything, it's not the least of which is the acting. Well, I hope they feel the spirit of the people that we're portraying, and that kind of can-do spirit about, doing something that's never been done before. These guys were hot rodders, What you do is you take a small car, you put a big engine in it, you try to make the car lighter and lighter, bigger engine, more speed, faster, keep it on the ground, and that's how you make a race car.
Ford decided that they wanted to win, so they enlisted the help of Carroll Shelby, who had won it as a driver. And in turn, a driver called Ken Miles. And it's sort of about, their sacrifice and commitment and their endeavour to build the fastest car in the world. It's brilliant for me. They're two real heavyweights of our generation, and I've grown up watching their work, so you expect it to be a daunting experience, and obviously there was a little bit of that at first, but they're really personable, down-to-earth, professional, and it's pretty amazing how quick that dissipates and you feel at home on set with them. I don't like comparing actors, particularly at this calibre. They're obviously very, very different. But one thing I respect about both of them is their versatility. You don't get to that level without challenging yourself and bringing something different to each project, and this film's no different. Ray McKinnon, what a guy. He took me out for a bit of food the first week I was here, made me feel at home. He's a terrific actor. and he's an Academy Award-winning writer as well. I've got interest in both of those disciplines, so it's been great to pick his brains, and more importantly, he's a great guy. It's been good to hang out with him. One thing I will say about Jim is that the best directors I've worked with, they retain this sort of almost like a childlike joy and excitement for what they're doing, and Jim definitely fits in that category. He's got tremendous energy, brilliant sense of humour. He knows exactly what he wants, and that makes life a lot easier for us. Charlie's just got obviously a wealth of information about different drivers and how it felt in the lead up to Le Mans, and the difficulties they had with the car, relationships with Phil Remington and Ken Miles, and what Carroll Shelby was like. And before I had the chance to do any real research, I had the real thing there, so I put a lot of that down to conversations with Charlie. Car races are going to be thrilling. The footage is going to be, stunning to watch. So I think it's going to be quite a ride.